We're going to talk to somebody today who I've admired for a really long time for a bunch of different reasons. One, because of his storied career. I mean, he's been at some great radio stations as a jock, as a PD, pretty much doing everything for a lot of years. Right now, he's a jock in New York City at a major radio station in a major shift with major ratings. And did I say major enough? Yeah. But one of the real reasons that I admire him, probably the most, is that he's kind of the last of a breed who is doing a type of show that was really prevalent in the 70s and 80s, and he's adapted that style through the years to be a major force still in 2022, and most people don't really know how to do what he does. So we're going to go into that because I think it's kind of fascinating that, there's a lot of different ways to be a jock on the radio. His way is kind of almost all but gone, but yet, you could do it. You're probably not going to be as good as him. Maybe after a ton of years, you could kind of get to that level. But it's just one more thing that you can do if you're a young jock and be really good, because the bottom line is really this. Being a great entertainer, it never goes out of style.
Broadway Bill Lee.
Hey Buckaroos, welcome back. Today is a very special day. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to talk to somebody who's part of the alumnus of CKLW, and I'll tell you why. When I was getting ready to do the Walt Baby Love conversation, the interview that I did with Walt, about a day before he got inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. And I'm looking through the list and it's like, whoa, this guy did too that we're about to talk to, Bill Lee. And it's funny because I never really met Bill and I didn't really know Bill. I certainly knew of Bill, and I'll tell you all about that in a second. But Bill was on my Facebook page. So, kind of weirdly, it's like, oh yeah, he's a buddy, no problem. I'll call him and see if he wants to do one of these because I really wanted to talk to Bill. So here we are. This is Bill Lee, Broadway Bill Lee. Welcome.
Thank you. It really is an honor. And for anyone who doesn't realize, Pat was a hero of mine when I was growing up and just getting into radio. I was living in Cleveland. CKLW was booming into town better than the local stations on AM. Yeah. And Pat was the midday maven. I mean, what a delivery, just a personal, relatable touch that we all looked up to. And gosh, it's an honor. It's great being able to talk.
Thank you. I'm kind of blushing if you can see the red. If not, I'll add red. Okay. In the post. Talking to you is really cool because I have used your name as an example with so many young people along the way that we'll talk about a little bit down the road here. Because I find, and then I was looking, I was like, wow, you've been doing this a really long time, but you have a really unique style that I'm really familiar with. My ears, tuned to it because from the time where you probably would have, kind of started to hone your craft in the beginning. But not many people do that. And later on, we'll kind of want to talk about that in this. But there's so much area to cover, a lot of stuff for young jocks here. And, and all the things that you've done. Let me start off with a really simple one, although it might be hard. You get the call that you're going to be inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. What is that like? What runs through your head when that thing comes? And were you nominated before, prior to this? Or is this like first time in?
I have to say that there have been many people over the last 5 to 6 years who have called me up swearing that the hall doesn't know what they're doing and they've got to be shut down and it's all political and there's something wrong with them because they did not accept that person's nomination of me to be inducted or to be at least nominated. Yeah. And these are big radio guys, Mike McVeigh, Howard Stern, Scott Shannon, my wife who's been nominating me. She's also in the business, and lots of people that I talk to and bump into, they say, man, this just isn't right if you're not nominated. So when I was nominated this year, I was obviously tickled pink. Sure. And not only that, but when I got the call from our cluster GM at Odyssey here in New York, I was almost speechless. And he had our program director on the phone, Jim Ryan, and I felt beside myself. I really almost for a guy who can come up with a quick line at the drop of a hat, I felt ridiculously embarrassed. But it's such a good feeling.
It's a really heavy honor, Bill. It really is. It's probably one of those things, probably when you were first starting out in Cleveland Heights or Cleveland or what, that's probably the last thing that you would ever think when you start your first radio job. It's like, well, I'm going to be in the Radio Hall of Fame.
My wife had called WLYT in Cleveland Heights back in 1972 and said, my husband will work for free. I got lucky. I wound up Sunday mornings and overnight Saturday nights working for $100 a week or $1 an hour.
Yeah.
And I got into it for the music. I was, in a bunch of garage bands growing up in Cleveland. I just loved music. That's the reason I got into radio, was for the music. I always loved the idea of being a DJ since the time I was very young.
When you're in the band, is it like rock band, top 40 band? I mean, there's kind of like two different camps there kind of going.
Well, actually, this was back in the 60s when I was in high school and early college. We played a lot of British Invasion, like CKLW. We played a lot of rock and roll, the stuff that was, just really forming what rock and roll became in the 60s. And, a lot of parties. We did a lot of fraternity parties and that kind of thing. And it was great. I played bass, but obviously I could play guitar and just about everything else. And we were our own roadies. So we were all inclusive musically.
Yeah, I had that same T-shirt. I did the exact same thing, doing the keggers, for college and stuff like that. Yeah. Which is looking for an easy way to get dates. The usual, the usual stuff.
Oh yeah.
So you get into radio in 1972, and at that station in Cleveland, and then you move to Georgia, and in 2 years you're the PD in addition to being a jock. Like that's a huge leap. How'd you pull that off?
Well, it started in Cleveland when Bill Paris became our programming consultant. UBC, United Broadcasting Company, owned the radio station in Cleveland. And they had several stations, mostly in Delmarva. And I got to know a bunch of the people there. But Bill really taught me the basics of radio. He was an acolyte of Bill Drake, obviously, and Buzz Bennett. And he taught me all of that, and I was a willing student, and I was a gopher who'd do anything. And when he came to that station, I did everything he asked, and he said, "You want to be music director?" I go, "Hell, yeah." And from that, he asked me, "Do you want to go to Columbus, Georgia? I'm consulting a station down there. We're kicking off a top 40, and they really aren't used to top 40 radio on FM down there. Want to try this?" I said, "Yeah, get out of Cleveland, you bet." And Cleveland in the 70s was not a shining example of, stardom, economic health, and certainly artistic freedom.
No, I remember when Lake Erie was actually on fire somewhere around that time, where before they cleaned it up, and now it's really nice, but yeah.
Well, that's why it was such a great hotbed for rock and roll, because it was kind of dirty, like the Lower East Side of New York.
And gritty, yeah.
When I was a child in the 50s, I would get sent to my room for my nap really young. And I just wouldn't stay in the crib. I wouldn't stay in the bed. And so my mom got into the habit of leaving the radio on. And that's where this all started. I would listen to hours of radio, not wanting to fall asleep for my nap. And I got to hear a lot of great disc jockeys when I was a toddler. And that's really where I got in. I grew up with rock and roll.
So after Georgia, you go to some place which I wonder today if it could be redone again. You go to Hartford at TIC, and I worked Hartford too. Geez, around the same time. I worked Hartford in 1970 at POP, WPOP.
Oh, okay.
It's funny, lives parallel kind of a lot. But it was a hot hit station with Mike Joseph. And, was that the first hot hits that he was playing with and stuff? So,
yes,
when you're on the air and you're the PD, I wonder if somebody could actually do a hot hits station right now and pull that off? Because it seems like, in other words, one that's really right up in your face. At least the ones that I heard. I never heard WTIC, but I've heard other, of the hot hit stations, and there's a lot of jingles and explosions. There's a million things going on, and the jocks are, they're running like their hair's on fire, but it's exciting, and it's all current music, and it's really whipping around really fast and in out fast. Tell me what that was like, and what that was like to program one of those radio stations, and what you got out of Mike Joseph, because I know the name, I know of him, never met the guy, but he did some amazing stuff.
Mm-hmm. He used to tell us stories of when he was the program director at WABC back in the first days of their top 40, and very eccentric man, very eccentric. Yes. And before we put the radio station on the air, they had assembled the staff. And the entire staff would spend every day for 2 months in the conference room. And we'd be going, we'd spend some time, everybody get an hour or two to make an air check. And the next day he would go over everybody's air check together. And he would.
Everybody in the same room.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was group air checking, like group therapy.
Yeah.
And some of his rules were songs have outro times. All right, this song has a 7-second outro time. I don't want you going over that 7-second outro. Wait a minute, it's fading, Mike. How do you know if that's 7 or 6 or 8 or 10? He goes, it's 7. I'm going to count it down on the stopwatch, and if you talk more than 7 seconds, we're going to have a problem. Same with the intro times.
Yeah.
And hitting the jingles. And a lot of times, the way his hot hits format worked was you back sell a record into a jingle, into a WTIC-FM, 96 ticks, da 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 da. You're right, hair on fire.
Yeah.
So it was, pretty interesting. All the jocks would be looking at each other kind of like, is this guy serious? Really? Outro time? And if I talk, and he wouldn't rake people over the coals, but by the way, aside from being eccentric, his eyes would go in 2 different directions.
Really?
And brilliant guy. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. No. It's well, a lot of times the really brilliant ones, are eccentric. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They're just looking at a different level. Yeah.
Or a different direction.
Or 2 different levels. Yeah.
And so, we'd sit around that conference table, and, as soon as we were dismissed for the day, it's kind of like we talked to each other going, this guy's out of his mind. How do I do? I've never talked down intros to the second, but I have to tell you something. That gave me a very integral piece of what I do on the radio and have done since then. Yeah. And that is be able to back sell quick into stop sets. Because the one thing that personal people meters really check on now is how quick you can fool the listener into hitting an exit ramp without them noticing. And if you're exiting music into a stop set, you don't want them to notice, and that's why back in the old days, we used to put the well-produced jingles and the rock songs first spot in the stop set, so that if I back sell a song into a stop set and it's a jingle, or it's a great sounding rock song or whatever that they're selling the album for, people would notice and they'd miss the exit ramp, they wouldn't tune out. That has become so important to me that I have used it to my advantage over the years. And Mike Joseph also became one of the reasons that I really relied on rhyming a lot, because I could get everything said with a certain amount of personality in 7 seconds, in 10 seconds, in 9 seconds. I could get that done and still do it cleverly without exceeding the speed limit or the time limit.
Yeah, and that's a skill. That's a learned skill, and and it's not easy. Some people, it's easy. You don't do anything, or you just do this, or you just do that. I want to actually, expand and blah blah blah, and it's like, well, that's editing, and it's hard because you really got to, the more you go like this, the harder it is, to compact what you're saying and still be meaningful, and have it have some sort of impact. I would think that you would have learned a lot of things from him that would have Mike Joseph that would have kept going. It's funny as you mentioned the 7 seconds on the outro. When I was at CK, when I first got there, no one ever said what he said to you guys, but they had a gold book, and you turn, and everything was paper. You look through, and you'd see a song like, Heard It Through the Grapevine, Marvin Gaye, and there would be, instead of just saying fade, it would say like 8-second fade, and because it was sort of unwritten, and nobody ever explained it that way. But it's kind of like there were particular endings. Somebody might, at the end of some songs, somebody might go, hey, write it, on the fade. And it's like, that's where the jingle needs to go, or that's where you need to be done, or, whatever. I mean, totally lost art now.
Yeah. And there's a reason.
Nobody ever points it out.
Yeah. There's a reason for that too. Bill Paris, the programming consultant who first made me a program director, explained it this way. He said that people, when they're listening, want a constant audio level. And the reason for that is, if a bunch of teenagers are out in the car listening to their favorite song cranked up, the last thing they want is a disc jockey to come in too loud. And the other last thing they want is for you to let the song fade so that it's down so far that the next song crashes in, it sounds disjointed, disconnected, and does not flow. So the very idea of being able to get something done before the song is gone makes that even flow possible, no matter what kind of listener it is, actually.
Yeah, you're like almost a human jingle, marrying the two together,
Correct.
Getting from one to the other. Before we go to the big 610, come on.
Come on now.
Yeah, back in that time, for everybody who are watching right now, particularly if you're young, there were really two radio camps. And Fred Jacobs, when he talks about if you were in the rock camp or the top 40 camp, he uses buses as an analogy. You were either on the rock bus or you weren't. Yep. Okay, I wasn't on the rock bus, but getting a little closer to the other side, which is the top 40 side, there was the WABC type bus, and then there was the Drake bus, and pretty much nothing else in between, or if there was, nobody cared, whatever that was in between.
That's right.
What bus would you have been on, or straddling, or whatever?
It's funny because I suppose the bus I was on was a short bus driven by Buzz Bennett. He's the guy who really set off this brand of top 40 in the early 1970s when I was just coming up and becoming a program director and modeling my jocks and modeling my own show after. And that would include a very Drake sound with unpredictability and perhaps a little of off-color, offshoot farther than Drake would let you go. And it would also include really tight, really quick shotgun jingles. Yeah. Shotgun jingles.
KCBQ.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. Super. Yeah. But Buzz was also eccentric.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, the stories and eccentricity among program directors and radio consultants is legendary in our business, probably more than any other. I mean, when I was getting into radio, I heard stories about CKLW where if you had dead air, there was a trap door and you'd fall through it and they'd bring in the next Pat Holiday.
They didn't have a trap door. That's funny. That's awesome. They did have a light that would come on and you'd be like, it's like one of those Arby's heat lamp things that would fry the side of your face. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Trap door. That's awesome.
I mean, Buzz Bennett was legendary for being really eccentric. And there were some I got to meet lots of guys who tried to model themselves after him. But the coolest thing in my whole career is we were doing a reunion for KFRC several years later in 1985. And they were showing video air checks of us up there on the screen. And there's several hundred people. It was the Gavin convention in San Francisco at the time as well. So the whole convention was there. Yeah. And as soon as they finished the air check of me, the video air check, I wasn't quite sure this was happening, but Paul Drew and Bill Drake were sitting together. They both got up, walked over to me, and Paul Drew said, "Wonderful." And Bill Drake said, that's just marvelous. And he shook my hand, as tall as he is. And I'm going, wait a minute. Did you call me marvelous and wonderful? You calling me that? I mean, to
Very
this
heavy.
day, that's probably the closest I can say to being inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame.
Yeah, those are to Drew and Drake are like, they're pretty much radio at that time. They were it.
Yeah.
They pretty much both of them were like God one and God two.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah,
Father, the Son, and I guess Bennett
yeah.
was the Holy Ghost.
I have a really good friend, Eddie Rogers, who I had done mornings with once, and he was at CKLW too, and he was a PD in Pittsburgh, and but Buzzy, it was a Heftel station, and Buzzy came in when they took over, and this is the story. I'm sure it's true, but I don't know how much Eddie embellished it, but. Buzz, it's the first day of the takeover. They walk in, and Buzz has got a Bowie knife. He's got a Bowie knife, he comes in, he opens the door to the manager's, the office, and the manager's sitting at sitting at its desk. He goes, "We're from Heftel." Bam! The knife goes right into the middle of the desk. He goes, "You get out."
Oh my!
The guy's like, "Whoa!" When the guy evidently he's looking at a knife, like, "Yeah, okay, I'm out." Yeah,
yeah.
Some version of that seemed to have happened.
Honestly, the guy who hired me at KFRC was Jerry Peterson, who was in the RKO family for several years at RKO, and he became Jerry Cagle, started using his real name.
Mm-hmm.
But he told me when he came in, he had all these tin soldiers lined up on his desk, and he had the whole staff come in. Come on in. Come on in. He's got all these little, they look like beef eaters, they're all standing there. And then he starts knocking over one at a time and says, "I'm afraid you're gone." Knocks over the next one. "We don't need your services any longer." And he went through the whole staff with toy soldiers, knocking them off the desk.
And each one corresponded to somebody there?
Yeah.
Wow, that's weird. That's really weird.
The truth of it is you and I have been in the business long enough to know that you'd rather be told to your face and honestly, even rudely and roughly, rather than have to guess for a month, "Oh my God, are they going to blow me out? Oh my God," and not know. It's funny because it's ridiculously well done.
Yeah. One of the things when we get into talking, for those of you watching, I wanted to talk to Bill about, and for some stuff for young jocks, people who are sort of starting out or they only been in the business for like a few years, and sometimes the old days are not exactly the way the old days get talked about today. That being one of them. I mean, I can remember, well, even when I did Big Jim Edwards and did his thing, it's like you were like at a place for like a year and a half, 2 years, and boom, you're moving on. I remember when I went to CKLW, I thought, man, if I can last 6 months, this would be awesome to have on my resume, and then I'll go somewhere else and actually have a career. So everything, where now it's like, well, geez, I've been here 9 years and the company just fired me. That's so unfair and all of that. And maybe it was unfair, but the 9-year part, assuming that was a short run, it's like, in our terms, that was a huge run.
Yeah.
Back then, because because it wasn't that way. It was like bang, 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 bang. But doing the little toy soldiers, that's a bit much.
Yeah. That's the legendary stuff. But
yeah. So how did you like KFRC? I mean, KFRC was a legendary Drake radio station. I think Cagle probably would have been the PD after Les Garland, probably.
Correct.
And Les went to do MTV with Bob Pittman, who now does iHeart. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. That was my big break into show business. I left TIC. I had actually gotten fired from TIC. The general manager at TIC in Hartford was a good friend of Jerry Cagle's. They worked together at WRKO in Boston. Mm-hmm. And so I had sent Cagle a tape at his insistence. And Jerry called up Perry Urey and said, let me talk to this boy. Let me talk to this guy you got here. And So I did, and he said, "Well, I just want you to come out so I can look at you and make sure you're not ugly." I said, "Okay, great." So they flew me out, made sure I wasn't ugly, and then I started a week later.
Yeah.
But KFRC, wow, the Big 610 was like legendary everywhere. I mean, anybody who's in radio knows that's one of the key radio stations. You got KHJ in LA, you got KFRC in San Francisco, you got OR in New York, and you got RKO in Boston, you got CK, and baby, these are the stations that threw flames. And these are the ones that will make your career. And when I got hired there, and it was good money too, 50 grand for a union contract. That was big money back
Wow,
then.
that is big dough. Wow. Although you're in San
Yeah.
Francisco, probably a little bit more expensive, but yeah, that's good dough. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. It was union job. Also my
Yeah.
first union job. That's the year I got vested in AFTRA, by the way. And boy, it's been a long time since. And I got to thank God for the pension that's coming.
Yeah, I was just going to say you get the after pension. Yeah, yeah. I have one
Not
too
only,
from CK, but it was only like 2 years before they sold the place, and then after disappeared. So I think the pension is like maybe $1 a year or something like that. It's kind of worthless. Was Dr. Don at at KFRC when you were there? The
he,
year I
he
can't remember when he retired. When he called it a day.
absolutely. He was the morning man. Dave Sholin, Mike
Sure.
Novak,
Yeah.
Rick Shaw,
Yep.
all did middays. Later on, um, Jackson Armstrong came in to do middays. Harry Nelson came in to do middays. Mark McKay, marvelous Mark McKay, was always the afternoon guy, and I was
Hmm.
the night jock. And Don St. John was the overnight guy. But we did everything. All our KO stations did everything that it not only sounded spectacular, 9 times out of 10, if you showed up for it, it was spectacular.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
everything very first class. I
Yeah,
mean,
then they didn't mess around. It was kind of like, they're there to win,
yeah,
period.
yeah.
There's
And,
no
and
second, no, there's no second, yeah.
that's right. And, I loved the high pressure. I loved it.
Hmm.
I'd be in there swinging for the fence on every break. You give me a 30-second intro, give me about a minute and a half, and I'm going to come up with a 30-second rhyme for that intro, and it's going to smoke.
Hmm.
And during stop sets, I'd be on the phones with people. I mean, every second. When I came out of there after 4 hours, I was drenched with sweat because I worked and I worked hard.
Yeah.
Um, One night I
Yeah.
was working, and Cagle brought up Wolfman Jack.
When you say brought up, he brought him up as opposed to
Yeah,
brought him up in a conversation. So you brought
correct.
him up.
He brought
Wow.
Wolfman Jack into the studio,
Wow. That'd be
and
cool.
I begged him to give me an ow on the mic, just a little bit. So then when the stop set was on, um, I had somebody else on the board. He took me back in the racking room where all the equipment was racked,
Yeah.
right behind where all the processing was in a different room from the studio. And he whips out this fat one and he says, "Oh, you got to try this, man. This is going to blow your mind." And I said, "Well, all right." and we were discussing the processing and see now this is low band, mid band, high band, tri band, and look at all, because KFRC had fabulous engineering. We had our own shop where we had a team of about 5 or 6 engineers working from 6 a.m. to midnight every day on equipment, repairing equipment, building new equipment, inventing equipment.
Wow.
It was like a laboratory back there. And so we had fabulous engineering, perhaps the best I've ever seen in my life. Phil Lerza was the chief engineer at that time. And he would do remarkable things. We actually broadcast live in motion from the KFRC mobile studio that Cagle insisted we have built. And we actually were able to broadcast going across the Golden Gate Bridge because Phil Lerza was flying a plane. He would take the Marty signal to the plane. The plane would relay the signal back to the transmitter. Or no, back to another relay that would go to the station that would go to the transmitter. And he was able to follow us around in a plane while we were broadcasting on the road.
Wow, that's a
I
pretty
mean,
intense. Yeah, yeah,
in 1982, that was just like ridiculous,
yeah,
ridiculous for the technology available at the time, you know?
yeah.
It's just
Wow,
crazy.
try that one out for an AM radio station, no less, too. I mean,
No
when
less.
yeah, I mean, for somebody younger right now, you go like, really? Oh, yeah,
Right.
that's kind of the way it was. Was what one last thing on KFRC was what name did he use? It was Paul Fredericks, the news person for Dr. Don.
It was a wide variety. We had a whole newsroom, as I'm sure you did. I got
I
a
don't think so.
lot from Dr. Don. We
He was
became good friends.
he was
And
amazing. He was incredible. I used to listen to him on FIL when I was in the Army at Fort Dix in Jersey.
sure,
Oh my God, he was unbelievable.
I got a lot of what I do on the radio from him, a whole
Hmm.
lot, including his drop ins. Later on, when I came back to San Francisco in the 90s, I bought his house because he had to move to Arizona for his health. He had just the most gorgeous house and he was selling it at the right price. And then we walked in, and Kay, his wife, was baking cookies. I mean, they made it perfect for us.
Wow.
And then he took me and said, "You see all these? They're my drop ins. You see all these? They're my joke books. They come with the house." And I said, "Your drop ins seriously come with the house?"
Wow. Wow.
I mean,
That's like
all the uh, everything from
decades
FIL.
worth. Holy
Oh
moly.
gosh. And I still use
Wow.
them today. I use them religiously today because they're so ridiculous and off the wall. People don't understand how to use drop ins anymore like he did.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's the classic sound of what's going on in the air, not necessarily what's being said, not necessarily the audio quality. It's exactly the sound it produces in you emotionally when you hear that. You
Hmm.
know, that's what I love about his stuff. But he
Yeah.
big,
That's
big
that's
influence.
that's pretty deep if you don't to somebody. I'm sure somebody watching this right now who's kind of younger and like, what is he talking about? How would that be? I mean, but you kind of have to kind of you, it's totally understandable when you live it. You know, like sometimes
Yes,
those drops are just they're just like a drum shot, like a rim hit. And
yes,
they're like accents. They just or they're funny or both. And
correct.
yeah, very 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 wow, Dr. Don stuff, very cool.
Yeah, big
So
time.
mornings
Well, when I
in
left KFRC, Jerry Cagle said there are two kinds of disc jockeys in this world, son. He
yeah.
goes, there are the disc jockeys that have been fired and the ones that are going to get fired. And you're one of those that are going to get fired. I said, okay. All right. Had a great time. I mean, it was KFRC was a pressure cooker. We were all out of our minds. We were having the time of our lives, like life in the fast lane, everything all the time. At that
Right.
moment, I got a call from Scott Shannon, who wanted me to come to New York to work for a new radio station he was doing called Z100. And he said, "I'll pay you $30,000. And I said, I would love to, but if I come to New York for $30,000, I'm not going to be able to feed my family. And by
No,
this
you would
time,
not. You
I already had a
absolutely would not.
son. Yeah, I don't care where I lived in Jersey, it still wouldn't be enough.
Yeah.
And I had to turn him down. So at the same time, a good friend of mine, Harry Nelson, who had been a program director at RKO,
Yeah, I know Harry.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, Harry, good, just passed away. One of my best friends of all time.
Hmm.
And Harry was starting up a 5 station network in Fargo, North Dakota. And so, I'm going, really, Bill, you're going to turn down Z100 in New York? Yeah, it wasn't Z100 yet. Nobody knew it was going to be Z100.
Right.
I turned that down and I go to Fargo, North Dakota for 45,000, and at that
Mornings.
time,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was a 5 station network. And I got off the plane in July and it was 102 degrees in North Dakota. And I'm going, wow, I've heard it was cold up here, but I didn't know it was hot up here. And it was an interesting time. The whole staff lived in the same apartment building. Um, and it was about a half a mile away from the radio station. And it was a frat house. We
Yeah.
turned the whole building into a fraternity house.
How old would
And
you have been then?
I
How,
was I was 29.
29?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you're younger, mornings are tough. That's a
Yeah.
tough gig because it
Yeah.
totally you almost should get, well, I guess you do get hazard pay in a way for doing mornings because it pays more, but for the wrong reason. At least to me, when you do mornings, your life is gone.
Yeah.
Unless the life somehow revolves about getting up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning and going to bed at 8 o'clock, and you like that, everything else is shot. It's fairly brutal, really.
It got even worse because Harry insisted that I become the production director. So that meant that after I got off the air at 10, we'd have to brainstorm about promos we were going to produce. And then I have all the commercials to produce. And I would never get out of there before 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was a long day.
Yeah.
Real long. But the funniest thing about that whole situation, because I just did a morning, I was really doing the same shtick I was doing in the afternoons and even at night in the morning, only a little slower because it was 6 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. I can't get myself to talk that fast.
Yeah.
But
and you're saying the time more.
Right. Yeah. The thing is we had such an unbelievable life that was all geared around that radio network when we were off the air. And we were such fast friends, all of us. So I went out and bought a $300 Chrysler LeBaron, 73 Chrysler LeBaron, and none of us had ever been to the Great White North before. So we realized that you're supposed to plug your car in so the block doesn't freeze overnight up there. And I don't know if this thing's got a block heater in it or not. Let's just leave it run. And so we worked out a schedule where we called it the dog. I would drive the dog home, and Maggie or the night jock, Jeff, would drive it in. And then Harry, who was leaving, would drive it home. And then Maggie, the all-night jock, would drive it in. And she would drive it home. I would drive it in. We got the whole staff to rotate it perfectly so that we never shut the car off. It ran for 7 months when it was below zero. And we just kept driving it back and forth. One jock took it, the other jock drove it. One jock took it, the other jock drove it, in and out of that radio station. Unbelievable. And that's the kind of thing we would do all the time. And I remember buying the car for $300, and I think the registration was $10.
Wow. Different times. Yeah.
No background check. Well, it was North Dakota too.
Yeah, true. But still, like $300 for a car. It's like, wow, that's long for those days again. Holy moly. It's funny. I mean, that's a pretty tight group of people that would be sharing a car like that. Now, if you were like in Calgary or Winnipeg or one of those things like that, what a lot of people do is they'll put their car in their driveway, and if they can't plug in, they'll have starters that the starter will, when the engine gets down to a certain amount of temperature, too cold, the auto start will kick in and bring it back up again. So if you're sleeping and let's just say your bedroom happens to be built over the garage, you'll hear the car go on and off, like 4 or 5 times a night.
How about that?
Let's I'm looking on your list places that you've been. One, WLOL in Minneapolis, doing afternoon drive, and also production director again, and also the Peak in Denver. Anything really unique about those? I mean, good stations. I mean, certainly well known, especially LOL at the time.
Oh yeah, LOL. I met my wife. She was.
Okay, that's pretty special.
Yeah, it was very special. I got there. I broke my best friend's heart, Harry Nelson, when I left Superstation WKFM up in Fargo. I just told him I couldn't take it anymore. I could not take that. I mean, it was great. I loved the fraternity house. I loved everything about it. But my ex-wife had made up run up a lot of bills on me. And so I needed to make more money. And the winter was cold. And in all honesty, this offer came in to work at WLOL from Rick Cummings, who was the vice president of MS Broadcasting at the time. And they had just bought WLOL. So we're such good friends. And he knew he wanted me. And he called and asked. And I said, oh, okay. And rushed off with a U-Haul trailer to Minneapolis from Fargo. And
also a cold place.
Not the warmest, but still about 10 degrees warmer. Maybe 10 degrees warmer.
Yeah, good enough. Close enough.
Yeah. Honestly, I got there and it was okay. It was a little too adult contemporary for a guy of my flame throwing abilities,
Yeah.
um, and sensibilities. Um, but I liked it. They were good people. They
Mhm.
loved and respected me and were treating me very well. Um, Company car, everything. They were great to me.
Nice.
Wonderful people. And I met my wife. She started just hanging around the studio, and
She worked
she was
there?
she was in the research department. She was finishing her last year of college. She was doing stand-up comedy and hosting and opening comedy shows for like Jay Leno and Pee Wee Herman and guys like, when the big comedians come through Minneapolis,
Wow.
she'd be at the club hosting the show. So she was really at that time teaching me a lot about on stage presence and on stage performance and how to handle that. And I was teaching her radio. And as things always work out, we got closer and closer and closer. But still, I was doing afternoons. It's amazing how many wonderful people work there. We had such a great relationship.
Yeah, there was a lot of cool times in radio back then. It's funny how that was kind of the sort of the way it was. Although I'm not in radio now, so I'm not 100% sure because I'm not at stations. But my guess is what was kind of the norm, smoking, here's the joint, whatever, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Then now it's like, even though it's legal in a lot of
right.
places, it's like, whoa, what are you doing?
That's a
It's sort
certain
of.
propriety. What law am I breaking here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's so much more strict, tense. I don't know
Buttoned
what
up
you.
in corporate, perhaps?
No, I know. It's just crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's jump ahead to New York because that's usually if you're in radio, that's pretty much everybody's goal. Let me see if I can get to the number one market, New York City, and all that sort of stuff. So after Minneapolis and then Denver at the peak. You go to Hot 103, which turned into Hot 97. It's funny. I'm not really sure what Hot did. Was it a full-on top 40 going up against C100, or a distorted version of top 40 for the market, or like no, straight ahead top 40 normal, or something different, or what was that
Well,
like there?
let me just backpedal for a minute and tell you how
Yeah.
that all started. I was at KPKE again. Rick Cummings, vice president of EMIS, had
Hmm.
just put on Power 106 in Los Angeles, which
Right.
was a high-powered combination of Latino dance music, which was starting to become a thing. Not really. Hip hop wasn't out yet. It wasn't there, but it was
Hmm.
mostly danceable records. As you remember, the '80s was full of great dance records, mostly considered R&B, but I'm talking about artists like Paula Abdul and a lot of danceable records. So it became a dance station. And so I went out there on a weekend and put the station on the air with them, had a bunch of different jocks, and I got to do a shift there for the week kickoff for that weekend. And then he said, we're going to be doing something. Don't make any long-term plans there in Denver because we're going to be doing something else in New York. I said, oh, cool. So the following August, my twins were born. And the same day, I got a call from Rick Cummings. Come to New York. We just put this thing on the air. It's Hot 103. It's the East Coast version of Power 106. So
Oh,
it
okay,
was
got
all
it. Okay.
dance music.
Yeah.
And at that time, dance music was already getting big. But to niche a radio station built on dance music and Latin, English, pop is what they call freestyle music. And Hot 103 at that point was playing stuff that was like 2 years old that had never been played on the radio, and all these, it had a circuit of maybe 15 or 20 big, well known in New York freestyle acts that were basically teenagers and young 20 something Puerto Ricans who got into the industry and started making great sounding pop records, but they were all synthesizer based, drum synthesizer based music. And we became their home and their stable. And we had a stable of these artists, and the music was huge in New York. And
Hmm.
we became that station while Z100 was doing run-of-the-mill top 40, I mean, basic top 40, and doing real well with it. But they had been on the air for 4 years already, and the market was ready because KTU, the original KTU, built itself on disco.
Right,
We
and
also,
that's yeah.
we also included old disco titles in our format, and so it was known as a dance station, basically.
Got
And
it.
it's interesting that you brought that up. Last night, I went to the motion picture premiere with Scott Shannon for Worst to First.
Oh
And
man, I was just looking at. I just saw that the trailer on YouTube like 2 hours ago. It
yeah,
kind of popped up on the side.
and it was really nice because everybody there was all the original Z100 jocks and Morning Zoo crew, and I know them all over the years. And we had such a great time, but it was so great seeing it in a theater because, man, you get that hot rockin' flame throwing Z100, you know, it's in great in theater sound with theater speakers. You're going, oh my God, from the top of the Gorilla Building. One thing Scott Shannon always understood, and that I love him for, is how big can you make this radio sound? Just how big? And that obviously was what CKLW and most of the RKO stations were all about. How big can we make this sound coming out of your radio? And that's one thing Shannon did with Z100 that made it work. It was one of the most integral components of that radio station. How big can we make this sound? And I have to say, when I got to Hot 103, that's the same thing Joel Salkowitz did with Hot 103. He was a production genius, more than a program director. He was a production genius as far as sound, building sound. He's always been an audio sound engineer. And Joel used to be my promo guy when I was the program director up in Hartford 10 years before. And so he said he was the program director now. And we used to just have a wonderful sounding radio station, and it pumped because it was dance music with Latin rhythms, with disco rhythms, with hardcore rhythms that were coming out of LA at the time. It was just a monster.
Small industry, even though it's a big industry, it's a kind of small group of I guess probably small group of people who actually kind of rise to the top. I suppose that would probably be in almost any kind of industry, you know. You know, and everybody sort of knows each other, and maybe in many times, like you and Rick Cummings and other people work together, people, you know, along the way, which is, you know, which is pretty neat. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't, you know, now that you were explaining that about Hot, it's like I kind of vaguely, you know, remember that. But if you're not in New York, you know, how would you know? You know, because it's a unique situation, and they rightly so built a radio station for their unique situation, which is
and that became really that became the beginning of niche programming. I mean, everybody started to niche program at that time. That format worked in Miami, in Houston, in LA, in San Diego, all the, you know, high Hispanic population areas.
Right. Yeah, sure. You know, and it's, you know, smart to do now. Like, you know, like we go to Florida a lot because, you know, we go to Orlando for the wintertime. And, you know, when you go to Florida right now, we started going to Florida maybe after I retired. So that's probably like 12, 13 years ago. And, you know, I'll just make this up and I'll give you a general idea. In Orlando, it would be like maybe there was 3 Spanish stations, let's just say out of 30, you know, something like that. Now there's probably 16, maybe more. It makes sense. That's the population.
Sure.
After New York, you go back to San Francisco.
Rocky Allen was doing afternoons at PLJ for Scott Shannon, who had gone to PLJ by that time. Yep. And Rocky Allen, I knew how much he was making. They published it in the papers. And
that's a bad thing to do, right?
Yeah, real bad thing to do. So I went into my GM and I said, "This guy, you got to be kidding! I'm not making more. I'm making half of what this guy's making. Come on, man!" And so I started trouble, and it was just about the time I got a call from Keith Naftali, who was my phone jockey at KFRC. He's now
everything is so intertwined.
Yeah, he's now the program director at KMEL. Went on to become Clive Davis's assistant at Arista Records, and from there on, he rewrote record industry history with Mariah Carey and several other artists, Whitney Houston, and just many more. And so anyway, he called me and said, "Yeah, we got an opening for mornings." And I said, "Well, is it a lot of money? I'm getting actually divorced from my first wife, and my wife and I, she might like California, but I know she's working on the air here in New York on Fox 5 doing traffic in the morning and all. I mean, she's got a pretty high profile job. She's on TV." And anyway, I just went out to see. Um, it was John London who was exiting mornings at KMEL. And he and Engelman, London and Engelman, and they went down to
Right.
LA to
Oh, yeah,
work
yeah, yeah.
at K West, I think, 106. So I replaced him, but they kept my co-host, their co-host, Renelle. She and I, right off the bat, didn't click. And here I am, just left the best job I'd ever had in New York. And I got to learn how to do mornings instead of rhyming and rapping over 20-second intros. I got to learn to
Yeah.
listen to people and speak and
Different gig.
converse. Yeah, big different. But
Hmm.
I've always prided myself on being able to work with anyone. But I think she was upset initially that she wasn't made the anchor of the show. Um, but she is multi-talented, and I knew that from the beginning. So I had mutual friends intercede for me with her, and then we started doing remotes from bars in the morning. And so it would turn out that the more drinks we had while we were doing remotes in the morning show, the better friends we became.
Right.
And after about a year, we got along famously, and we had the biggest guests in the business and out of the business. I mean, everybody from Rosa Parks to Nadia Comaneci to James Brown to Tupac and Biggie, and I mean, everybody from
Wow.
every walk of life came in there, and we interviewed them.
Did you
I
do the
mean,
remotes? Did you do the remotes in a bar?
yes, they were. Well, a place like Chili's or a place like Red
Just
Robin,
so they would
that
come
kind of.
in, not in the station. A lot of them
No,
was
no,
out.
we would interview people mostly at the station, but
Oh, okay.
we got to be friends, my co-partner and I, Renell
Yeah, yeah,
Moon,
yeah, yeah.
and we when we were doing these, and I mean, we'd have people dancing on the tables, and it was a free for all, and we loved it because it sounded great on the radio. Um, but I mean, that gig doing mornings at KMEL, the morning zoo crew, that's what it was. The new Jack Zoo is what we called it. When I
Hmm.
got there, we got rid of London and Engelman and the morning zoo crew. We became the new Jack Zoo. And because the radio station had gone 100% hip hop and R&B, which was even a far cry from me. I mean, I had known a lot of hip hop guys in New York, from Public Enemy, and I mean, from a lot of these groups. And when I got to the West Coast, it was a different bunch of guys. I don't know if you remember this in the early 90s, but there was a big rift between East Coast, West Coast rappers.
Did not know that.
And
I
yeah,
remember the riffs. I just didn't know if it was about the coast part. Everybody
yo,
shooting each other
yeah,
and stuff. And
yo,
yeah,
man, East Coast, West Coast, and
right.
those gang signs meant something, and so you'd have all the East Coast rappers like Public Enemy, and then you'd have the West Coast rappers like Snoop Dogg and Tupac and Digital Underground, and these guys they didn't accept me because I was from New York, and they were cool. It was a cool reception to
Right.
have me as the white guy as the leader of the morning show. And in all honesty, 30 years ago, it was a great education because I thought I was not white privileged whatsoever. I had no concept of that. And I thought I was as racially emancipated from racism as anybody could be because I was in groups with a lot of African Americans, and they taught me this and I taught them that, and we're like
Yeah.
brothers. And I remember how it was in this country in the early 70s. It was going along famously. Racism was kind of like in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Um,
Very much
but
so.
by this time in the 90s, it was bubbling up again and not getting good. And becoming the very first all hip hop station in America, KMEL was a radio station that we pioneered. And I learned so much because I basically was the white guy with a group of multicultural people on my staff in the morning
Right.
show, multicultural people, um, you know, uh, uh, I mean, Asians, Samoans, Hispanics, obviously, African Americans, obviously, but we were the people station, and I was in the minority, and that was okay because I learned a lot about different cultures. I learned a lot about how prevalent, and I would never normally have believed this, that white privilege does exist just because I'm white. Things happen for me that don't happen for them. They just
And you
happen for
and,
me.
and you would see it when you're with somebody else or something like that. You'd
Yeah,
see things where you would kind of like, ooh,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And not only that, but this was 30 years ago. I mean, that term never came up 30 years ago, but I knew it.
Hmm.
I understood it. And so it didn't surprise me when it started happening a few years ago. But what an amazing education. It wasn't the best radio I've ever done. I certainly didn't get to shine. I made sure that Renelle got to shine. She was funny. She knew every hip hop artist and every black entertainer. She was good looking, so they'd hit on her. It was a wonderful morning show.
Yeah.
And she's a great singer. I mean, very well known, keys to the city several times.
Did you have a feeling, at that station or at any other station, but at some point it was going to go off the rails? It was getting to this or to that or whatever. Your PD thing starts kicking like this isn't quite working either for you or that the station itself is kind of going a little too far in one direction or another.
Great question, because when I left New York, when I left Hot, it was Hot 97 by then, and it was still a dance station.
Yeah.
I told them, we really got to be playing some of this hip hop. This is where it's at in 1991. I mean, if you're gonna, you got to at least be playing "It Takes Two to Make a Thing Go Right."
Yeah.
You got to
Yeah.
at least be playing that song. I mean, come on. And
I think so.
they were
Yeah.
afraid. They were totally afraid. So
That's
then
like a
when I
pop
went,
song almost, kind of.
yeah, nowadays it's
Yeah. Yeah. It's
nothing.
like
But
nothing. It's yeah.
back
Whatever.
then it's, ooh, it sounded like, oh my God, So when I went out to KMEL, the People's Station, it blew their minds, and so they decided to send not Steve Smith, but his assistant program director out to a convention and sat down with me and asked, "What are we doing here?" Because that they got to bring this back to New York and do something like this because this is obviously hitting out here. And we had great, solid number one music station ratings. Number one station in San Francisco was KGO, the all news station.
Forever.
But
That
we were
was
the
number one. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we were the top music station, though. There was no question. And I
Hmm.
was on the number one morning show and the number one station in San Francisco for 4 years. So it was great.
I didn't
But
realize.
it's,
I didn't realize KMEL was that large. You can't pay attention to every single market. I knew they were good stations, strong, but not that strong. But so yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah, we
interesting.
did very well. And
Yeah.
here
Cool.
again, it wasn't being followed by everyone because everyone didn't want to follow a rap station. And that's what we were. And, most of the newspapers referred to us as bringing hip hop to the suburbs because
Hmm.
we were still a top 40 station. We would do crazy things like play Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit because it was number one at the time, and then go right into Tupac. I mean, what? But
Yeah.
we would just do that kind of thing. But it was becoming very mainstream, very successful, and very scary because there was this East Coast, West Coast gangster thing happening at the time, and it wasn't safe by any means. It was
Okay.
violent and it was scary.
Yeah. That's
Um,
not good.
yeah. Um, and the ratings started to sag when we got competition from my former inspiration, Bill Paris, who was my first mentor that made me
Hmm.
the first program director. He
Yeah.
came out and started consulting at KSOL, and he knew what to do to take us
Right.
down. He knew what to do. And so he started taking us down, and about a year goes by, and I was finally out. And at that time, because I had been doing mornings, I'm going, now what am I going to be? A morning guy or to go back to what I do best and work
Hmm.
afternoons or evenings? Which way do I go? Both? Either? I was out of work for a year. And at this time, I had 8 dependents. I sold Dr. Don's house, moved into something a little more manageable, and did a lot of guest appearances around the country on radio stations where the PDs loved me. And I'd just go out and can I do a guest shot to, get some fresh tape? And they all said, yeah, sure, no problem. And I'd go on and do my, rap and rhyme and Broadway bill.
Yeah.
And
how many people do you think, sorry to interrupt, but things are popping, radio guys like,
sure.
How many people do you think would do that now, would actually, to me, that makes total sense. It's like, my tape is old. I got to be in the game right now to show people who might hire me that I can do it right now and all that sort of stuff. So to do something either for free or to, go to some other market and, and sit in for, a few days, do vacation fill, whatever. I mean, that's totally the logical way to go. How many people you think would do that right now, of people that you have met, in radio right now? And I guess I'm talking to somebody who's younger going, well, I would never do that. Why would I do that?
I don't know if our kind of disc jockey really exists to that extent anymore. You have to remember that in a work or out of work, these are multi-platform entertainers now. If you're having a problem, if you want to get your name out there, if you want to be out there, make a great video, get on social media and do some funny stuff, walk the streets and do a man on the street interview. I mean, there's a million ways they're doing it on social media. I know a lot of guys who were recently out of work, and they're all over social media, doing a really good job. Some of them are getting hired, some aren't. Most are not getting hired at the same level they left. And that's just the way things are happening now.
Yeah, from that point of view, it's definitely a different business. And then there's the people who have never been in radio who are doing stuff on YouTube or whatever. And some of their, some of the stuff people you see on YouTube, you're like, wow, that was pretty darn inventive. That was pretty darn good. And, there's this 19-year-old girl, or this, there's like a 21-year-old kid who was like, that was pretty heavy duty. Wow. And they're just winging it. And, and you're like, wow, you're pretty talented. And there's thousands of them.
Have you ever seen on TikTok, there's this thing called duetting on TikTok. And a lot of these disc jockeys, what they'll do is they'll have themselves on split screen like we are. And they'll do a break and say, okay, now I want you to try it. I'll shut up and you try it. I'll put your script up there and you got an 18-second intro, go for it. And some guy who's not in radio at all will say, okay, I'll try it. And he's on the mark, WPJC, and he'll read the script and he'll get it done before the vocal comes in, And
wow,
they'll go, yay!
Cool.
They do that.
I have to look for that.
I probably was the first one to start doing this from a studio, putting radio on video and doing it from a studio. But now there are so many guys doing such creative things like that the key to it was, and I knew what the key was audio. You can't put radio on video unless you're plugged into the radio audio. People aren't going to want to hear you talking into a mic. People want to hear what it sounds like from the radio.
Yeah, 100%.
So once I got the way to interface a radio control board with an iPhone, then I could shoot video anywhere, anyway, and still get radio. But the guys now that are doing it, I mean, they give themselves a quick introduction, say, okay, I need somebody to give me the word of the day. What's the word going to be? This guy Brew out in California, great talent and gorgeous. I mean, a chick magnet. He'll ask for the word of the day. People, type in the word, okay, I'm going to do the break. And he'll find a way to work that word, a ridiculous word usually, into the break. It's so inventive. It's so creative. And there's so many guys doing such good stuff now on social media.
And it's so smart to do that now. Like, if to me, if you, if you're going to be on the radio now and you want some longevity, it's like you really should be wading into TikTok or YouTube or other things to do the other stuff, because it just shows another side of you. I often wonder. I used to pay, when I was a manager, I used to pay attention, and maybe it was just in me, but it sort of seemed this way. And you tell me if you think, well, okay, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. I don't know. I used to watch, like here in Toronto, and the morning shows in particular. Okay, the morning shows. and in a couple other markets that I would have to go into. And so I'm watching the morning people, and they went from morning shows where you would see TV spots. Okay, this is before YouTube really sort of started to kick. Okay, so
Right.
here's the spot for, like say Shannon on Z100. Shannon's there, and the money's falling on him, and all the usual sort of stuff. Okay,
That's right.
Or there's two guys. There's a guy and a girl, and they're doing a bit. And that's the TV spot. And then that went away, I think, to save money, where it's either just a billboard and there's a picture and they're not doing anything, or it's a TV spot and it's only about the radio station. And you could see the numbers go up when you could see them, and they would go down when you can't see them. And they stayed down for a while, and then somebody would start to come back where they're back on TV again, okay, and you'd see the numbers go up because you can see them. They're doing bits. They're kind of funny. It's just more personal. From watching that, it just sort of struck me that I don't know if a regular person, for whatever that does inside you, of watching somebody that you hear on the radio and that do something that's funny or clever, or it's just neat, whatever they do. I don't think people can discern a regular television station versus YouTube. If it doesn't matter which one you're watching, they get the same vibe coming at them that hits them. And you know what I mean? And it just, I like them. I feel close to them, that they can see. So, I mean, geez, to me, if you're a jock on the radio, like you're doing, like you want to be doing some YouTube stuff, so they see that, and people like you, I mean, it's pretty deep, inside stuff, but, I think that sort of resonates in some, weird form.
It's interesting too, because I mean, it used to be, you want to keep your anonymity and that mystique of being on the radio. You could look like anyone.
Yeah.
I could be walking next to you right now down at the record store to see if you're buying Elvis's new song. I mean, especially those spooky, scary, rhyming DJs they used to have back in the late 50s and early 60s. You can only imagine what they look like. You were lucky, and once in a while you'd see a sketch graphic caricature of what this disc jockey looks like, and you go, "Oh, wow, does he look like that?" But so the very idea of exposing your reality on video is kind of a new way of getting real. And getting real is really where it's at. And paying attention to the stuff we used to pay attention to, like how well it's produced, or how polished it sounds, or how correct the grammar is, and all that. All these things kind of don't matter that much anymore. What matters is, are you keeping it real? Are you keeping it real? Can we see the whole reel?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Let's move ahead. So back to New York, and back to New York for the final stop so far. You've been back in New York now for 26 years, somewhere in there. I was
1996. Yeah, I was out of work again for a year, and it was scary. So I wound up at KTU. I had heard through the grapevine that Frankie Blue, who had been the music director for Scott Shannon at Z100, was getting together with a bunch of high-powered people who just let me go from, and it wasn't Clear Channel, it was Shamrock at that time. It had gone, it's gone through like 6 different incarnations since then. But they were putting this station on. And I had heard through the grapevine it was coming to fruition. I could tell it was going to happen. And then finally in March it happened, and they called me and wanted me to come in for an audition, and in April. And the week I had to go in, I was ready to go in for an audition. My twin sons, who were just maybe about 7 years old, burned down the house out on Long Island. My wife in California she was having heart problems, and it looked like she was going to need open heart surgery. And that happened. This all happened the same week I was supposed to go to New York to audition for KTU.
Wow.
And I had been out. I was out of work for a year. The severance was running out. The bank account was running out. And all I could do was pray to the good Lord and go, what do I do here?
Whoa.
What do I do? I've got to get this job. I've got 8 dependents. I've got, somebody who needs me here, somebody who needs me there. What am I going to do? And I just went the following week. They said it was okay. They loved me enough to say, all right, we'll bring in another candidate for this week, but you're going to be out here next week, right? And I said, yeah. So everything got taken care of, not storybook, but everything got taken care of. I went in and I did the morning show at KTU just as an audition. I knew they weren't looking at me for mornings, and had a great time. Loved being back in New York. Loved everything about it. They wound up hiring RuPaul for the Morning Man, who was perfect. And his co-host, Michelle Visage, and I had worked together at Hot 97. And she was in the group Seduction. They had a couple of hit records, but we had been on stage together and worked together for a long time. So they made her his partner, and they've gone on to do several shows together. She's gone on to star on stage in London and New York now. And he's legendary himself.
I'm assuming that at that point they're not disco at that point, or they're moved away from it, or they still are.
This was a new KTU. This was Frankie Blue starting up a new station that was WYNY. It was an adult contempt. KTU itself had gone off the air, became K-Rock. Howard Stern worked there.
Okay.
So we resurrected the call letters. We were able to get the call letters. And so we put KTU back on 103.5, which is where I started at Hot 103. And go figure. It's too confusing, and don't even try. But when I got there, it was magnificent because they had tapped a brand new market of dance music, of new music. I mean, we were right in that lane for NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears, as well as all the dance music that was not getting exposed in New York ever since Hot 97 became a hip hop station. They didn't play dance music anymore. So we were able to scarf up all the dance music that they threw away and put it on KTU. We went to number 1 in one book. And I mean, every demo, 12 plus, 17 to 50, 18 to 54, 25 to 54, 65 plus. Everyone in New York was listening to KTU. Everyone. I would be one of those situations where I'd be walking down the street in Chinatown. Oh, we love you, Broadway. Because I would have listeners call in and say, we love you, Broadway. And she'd say, oh, we love you, Broadway. And that happened several times with a bunch of people while I was just, going out to dinner. And that usually only happens to TV personalities, especially in New York.
Yeah, it's a great feeling. And not a lot of people in radio get to experience what it's like to be at one of those radio stations where they come out of nowhere and they, sort of crush everybody, or just being number one, really, at a number one radio station, because, every market's got 40, so there's only one. There's 35, 5 and below,
right,
that kind of thing. Yeah, that's neat, especially to light one up and then take it there and be part of it.
And keep it there. We were planning to keep it there, and it could have stayed there forever and ever, but it was bought by Clear Channel, they had become Clear Channel by that time. And they had bought Z100, so they put us together and they started rating our staff and taking them over to Z100, because there's a lot of companies don't realize this, but this has been going on for 20 years now. Cluster radio, cluster mentality, cluster programming is not so that you can cover every format in town and have a piece of the market by covering every format. The cluster mentality is you have your blocker stations, you have your wide receivers, and you have, your fullbacks. And they turned KTU into a blocker.
Yeah, they don't want something knocking down Z100, so all of a sudden the numbers go low enough that they can't charge full pop on they can't push rates. Yeah,
Z100 and in this market, Light FM as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and at least those are two different formats, but
upper, lower, same audience, upper, lower.
Yeah. It's too bad because a lot of times there's a lot of stations in a market, but if somebody's got a lot of stations in a cluster, you really only have probably realistically half of the stations, because the other ones are blockers. They're trying to knock somebody else or
That's right.
protect.
And
Yeah.
it's a miasma of format. I mean, if
Hmm.
somebody else is coming on strong, they'll turn KTU a little bit more rhythmic. And if somebody else is coming on, they'll turn it a little bit more pop,
Hmm.
and it just lost definition. And that was a labor of love for everybody who was there when we took it to number one and kept it at number one and had the most exciting promotions. To watch that happen to it, not only consolidation, but then what happened in the year 2000 was the digital era comes to your fingertips. Yeah,
Right.
forget records. Okay, we got over that. Forget tapes. We got over that. But forget CDs? Are you serious? Isn't that digital? No, it's not a computer program. And from now on, a mouse is all you're going to be touching. All right?
Right. Right.
You mean I'm going to run this whole radio station on a $10 mouse? You mean that's what I'm doing now, is holding a mouse and hoping everything clicks in? You mean I'm cutting and pasting instead of putting a record on a table? Is that what you're telling me? And we lost a lot of great radio people when that happened. And by the same token, if you wanted to stay in the business, you better learn it. You
For
better
sure, you better
learn
learn.
you better learn computer technology, and you also better learn how to use that studio and how to use that system. We were lucky; it was a good system at KTU when Clear Channel got a hold of Next Gen and the profit system, and that became the
Hmm.
standard. That became the industry standard. A lot of other knockoffs that a lot of
Yeah,
different
yeah, a
companies
bunch of them.
tried.
Yeah, yeah, and some you could do good stuff with, some you can't. I was going to ask you about it later, but this is kind of a perfect time, just before we get to CBS-FM. Um, During COVID, you would have had to. I'm assuming you, just like everybody else, you're not going in the studio. You're doing stuff from home and stuff.
Yeah,
When you're voice tracking the show and stuff. But for a lot of radio stations, not all, but a lot of the radio stations, and maybe it comes down to the equipment or the person or both. But a lot of stations you listen, you go like, and you'd hear the level, it's like, okay, that doesn't sound like it did before. The person isn't talking up the songs. They're not over the stuff the same. The levels are all over the place. He's talking, but, he's being, he or she is being buried by the intro and all that sort of stuff.
or it
Um,
hits the vocal, because the
yeah,
track
crushes it.
slips.
Yeah, yeah, or doesn't back time at all. That's what a lot of it was. It was just, it was almost like a different type of radio where nothing got talked up, maybe other than the first
Yeah,
couple seconds, which was safe to just start to roll underneath it. But I
right.
mean, you did not do that. So was that a learning experience with with the equipment, with the system, whatever the kind you had there or have now at Odyssey?
Yeah, I never really voice tracked at KTU, and I did learn how to work with the digital technology, and it did become wonderful, especially the Vox Pro.
Hmm.
This Vox Pro unit where you record phone calls or
Yeah.
yourself, and you could do so many digital gymnastics and manipulations with the Vox Pro that, and you could actually have the music run itself automatically on auto. So, and it got to be pretty good. The next gen system was really good, so that you could work on a production, or you could work on a phone call, or you could work on something, and I could get 4 calls edited together and perfectly produced in about 90 seconds. And
Nice.
if you're asking for a winner, and you got like a 4 minute record on, a 3.5 minute record on, you want to come back and pay off the contest or something, caller number, sorry, caller number 101. Oh, no, man, sorry. Caller number 102. Oh, think about it this way. You could still save 15% on your car insurance with Geico. What? Hi, you're caller 103. You just won tickets to see NSYNC. Yeah. And I could get all that done on a Vox Pro while my music is playing automatically, and I loved it. Honestly, I saw the advantages of digital radio, and I loved it and ran with it. A lot of people my age couldn't. Loved
Yeah.
it.
I wonder how many people your age, our age, or even a little bit younger that were in radio that that did not want to embrace that, could still be going if they actually did embrace it.
Right.
Kind of like missed the boat. Like, oh man, you should have learned that. The same thing. You kind of had to be on the bus or not on the bus, I guess. But I get into tech stuff really early when I was a jock at CK because I happened to catch a board up. This is mid '70s. There's not PCs out yet. Like,
Right.
Apple is not Apple. And Bill Gates is still in high school or something. And
Right.
yeah, really. And he started talking to me about computers. I was like, well, that sounds like might be something someday. So I went back to night school while I was jocking. But
Awesome.
yeah, I learned how to do all of the computer languages at the time, even the kind like
wow,
COBOL,
you're talking mainframe.
Yeah, for sure. With the punch cards. Yeah, no, 100%. You walk in with the punch card.
Wow.
Yeah. But point being of that is because of that, it's like no fear of tech stuff, and it makes it easy to to adjust and and morph into wherever you got to go. Just kind of like doing this video stuff. It's like, okay, whatever. It's just another thing. I mean, you're really lucky and smart to have made that transition, because that's kind of where you got to go. Every time a tech moves, you got to kind of move with it.
You want to stick around, you gotta swim, keep swimming. You got to keep up. And that's was just my philosophy. I was never really achievement goal oriented to keep up, but that if that's what I had to do to stay on the radio, by God, that's what I'm going to do. And I did. I'm telling you, there's nothing like being in a digital studio now. It's wonderful. And that's what I've done at home. And that's why I can sound so damn good on the radio from home, because I use my digital tools to make it not sound he didn't hit the vocal, or he stopped talking now, or the levels were off, or my show does not sound like half-ass voice-tracked radio.
Yeah, good for you. I mean, that's it's such a smart thing to do. I was kind of looking at the math of when you get into 1972 to now 2022, you've been doing this for 50 years, and and more than the last half of that in New York City. Ed, for everybody who does not know who Bill is on WCBS-fm, and he's been on there for seemingly ages now doing Afternoon Drive, which is quite a feat. And that station always runs pretty much number one or number two in the market almost all the time, being a classic hits radio station. And you have great numbers, hence the Hall of Fame thing. Jim Ryan is the PD there, or is he PD of there and a couple other stations in the cluster?
Yeah, Jim is also the vice president in charge of 102.7, which is a younger leaning AC. Their direct competition is Light FM, and they're doing a great job. I mean, we've got a lot of very heritage radio stations in our cluster in Odyssey. We've got WCBS 880 News AM. We've got 1010 Wins. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. I mean, WFAN, the very first and premier, still to this day, premier sports station. And the FMs too. K-Rock, where Stern used to work, is now Alt 92. And so with all these stations, Jim is also with WNEW 102.7. And it's the same NEW frequency. But it's, like I say, hot AC. And CBS FM is obviously when you go back, what used to happen in New York was all the disc jockeys from WMCA in the 70s went to work for WABC. And then when ABC ditched their format and they all moved to WCBS-FM. And hence, WCBS-FM always had a great host of disc jockeys that were, number one, well-known. Number two, were great at their craft. Number three, knew the music inside and out. It was an oldies station so people who loved the oldies, and in the 70s, 80s, and up until the 90s, people really loved didn't mind the word oldies. And still, anybody over 80 right now still wants the oldies back. And where's the doo-wop shop?
Well, they're the hits.
You're
playing the station with 100% hits, and 100% jock hits too. In a way, I did a lesson a while back because it sort of struck me. And I was just thinking of you, and I was thinking of CBS FM. and all the people that that have come through there. The air staff is sort of like the Expendable movies. All of the actors, really, I mean, all of the actors have all been stars. They've all been, stars in their own right. Everybody would know them. They're really comfortable. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. I mean that's kind of what it is.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And the last two radio stations I've worked at have been a calculated strategic amalgamation of former radio stations. KTU, Frankie Blue is from Z100. They had Joe Causey from the original KTU. They had me from Hot 97. They would bring back calculated, and actually our midday guy came with me from KMEL in San Francisco for the hip hop angle. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they crafted it. CBS-FM, when Dan Mason and Brian Thomas decided to relaunch CBS-FM in 2007, after it had been torn apart and called Jack FM with no jocks. When they decided to relaunch it, they got Joe Causey, who was from KTU. They got me, who was from KTU. And they had Dan Taylor, who was one of the original CBS-FM jocks, and Bob Shannon, one of the original CBS-FM jocks. And so we kind of brought together the old CBS-FM listeners and the other listeners who had nowhere to go after we left. And it worked like a charm. I mean, we had great ratings out of the box. We had front page of the newspaper. We had the mayor declare it CBS-FM Day. Hillary Clinton was doing our drops.
No way. Really?
A host of people, but she was one of the drops in rotation.
Yeah. Well, and she, being in New Yorker, sure.
Yeah, she was the senator at the time. And I mean, that's the caliber of stuff we had going for us.
It's a legendary station, and I never really understood why because they were doing okay even before that. It's why they would have blown it up for the Jack thing. It's like sometimes radio companies kind of even if they're a standalone, it's like sometimes they don't want to answer the question, how much is enough? You always kind of want to get that a little bit more, and then they blow the thing up. And you got half of what you had before,
right?
And you go like, well, maybe you should, maybe just improving that would have been a better way to go, as opposed to blowing it up and going into the shiny new thing.
Of course. And they were listening to too many focus groups. They were listening to too many things that were correct. I mean, disc jockeys, especially by that time, the disc jockeys at CBS-FM were too much reverb, too much jocking, too much nothing to say, too much on CBS-FM, which still had that image, but it wasn't getting real, man. Those jocks were great. They passed their performance peak, and they were kind of phoning it in. And nothing wrong with that, and they're all my age now. That's how old those guys were. But it was a CBS-FM. And here's the Pointer Sisters on CBS-FM. And that's pretty much the content you would get. And so I understood that the focus groups would say, okay, you got to blow this up. And I understood that the format purists would say, yeah, the oldies are great, but can I hear please something from the 80s? I mean, I'm already 15 years past that. Can I play? It's been 20 years. Can we hear something from the 80s? So I understood why they went to Jack, but I don't understood why they decided to get rid of everything. And
they could have just morphed it. Just start moving the jocks out, and then other ones come in. They could have just probably done that whole thing in probably a 9-month period and just turned it over. And
just trying to be too drastic.
Let's go through some stuff for some younger radio people. I'm going to bounce some questions off of you, and you tell me the first thing that comes into your head. And if you need some time to think about it, that's cool, and I can just tighten it up and all that sort of stuff. Okay.
All right.
So when did it strike you? At what point along the way of your career did it strike you like, hey, I'm pretty good, and this is my career, and I'm good at it? I know that sounds egotistical. I don't mean it that way, but sometimes something clicks off, and it's like, I should be doing this.
Yeah. In 1975, when I became a program director at WCGQ in Columbus, Georgia, I knew that I knew what I knew. And I knew that I was good at beating other guys who thought that they knew what they knew. And so I thought, I've got a future in this. And not only could I direct jocks, I could jock pretty good. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I kind of knew, but it really got built along the way, the more success I had. But yeah, that when I was my first program director job.
Being a jock or being a PD, which one did you like better? If you could only do one, just one.
Jockeying.
Yeah.
No question. Hands down.
Okay.
Oh, there's no question. My wife and I are both like that. I mean, when voice tracking started happening, they pay ridiculous, like $25 a shift. You go, are you kidding me? You want me to voice? You want a highly paid major market disc jockey to work for $25 a day? What are you, out of your mind? And we're
Really?
both radio purists like that, and neither of us want to do anything but give the sacrosanct respect to that studio, that shift, that time, those professional skills, and everything about being on the radio for an air shift with all of the mechanical aspects and the reverence that you have for what's going on in there. I mean, how dare you even think that you'd want me to put on a suit and walk out of the studio and, I'll just voice track a couple of breaks and come to the sales meeting. What are you, crazy?
Yeah. A lot of people do that, though, unfortunately. When you're a jock, you move a lot of cities. Did you like moving a lot of cities? Some people love, like, I know me, I used to love going to different cities because you could kind of start over again and try new stuff and, or redo some of the old stuff with Twisted and all that sort of stuff. Did you like moving or not like moving? Because it's a part of the industry. It is, it is what it is.
I'm going to be totally brutally, perhaps spiritually honest. I loved it for the same reason you did. By the same token, it was not good for my family. I have 5 kids, and every one of them was born in a different state. And
Wow.
we never got to put down roots. They never got to go to the same school long enough. It meant for me being extra stressed, their moms being extra stressed, not having roots, not having family. A lot of people have family. Things that need to be done with kids, with a home, with life in general, need the help of other people. And we've never, ever had the help of other people because we've been apart from families. And so it really took its toll. But like you say, I loved it. I'm especially when I'd go right after the interview and you're there for a few months before you can move the family. Great. Oh, honey, where did you get her? There's this great restaurant. We got to come here.
Yeah. It's fun too. And it also kind of gives you I think sometimes a little bit more worldly view of, of the world.
Yes.
Because well, Fargo, San Francisco, that's like 2 different planets, I would assume, and throw in New York in there too. You got some 3 different, big differences. Yeah.
Yes.
You and I have gotten gunned a bunch of times along the way. I'm just sort of curious. Like I got fired 4 times. Once when I was just starting out, I had a friend of mine come visit the station. He worked at another radio station. I was on the afternoon drive on a day timer. The station was literally off the air because it was dark. And you got to turn the transmitter off and all that sort of stuff. Kid comes over to visit. Manager comes in. Boom, get out. So I get fired. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I was like 18 at the time. Mm-hmm. And then, 3 times after that, at major stations, always new owners coming in. I'm the PD, you get out, that kind of thing. It's just a kind of a way of life. I think there's a certain thing of some sort of, inner fortitude, whatever, how you think of things, glass half full, half empty, that kind of deal, somewhere in that area. After the first time, because the first time is always a shocker usually, but after the first time, what would typically run through your head and what you kind of plan on doing? Okay, now I got to do this.
It's never changed. It's fear, shock, awe, and fear. And I've always done well in dire situations. I've always snapped into place. I've gotten good with God, good with people, good with trying to find work, good with offering myself to, like you said earlier, offering to get fresh tape and work for free and that kind of thing. I took it all very studiously and I snapped into position. In all honesty, when I was out of work for a year after KMEL before coming back to KTU, it was at the point where I had sent out every tape, I had gotten every job offer, and it wasn't more money than my wife was making. And then if we had to move, she'd have to find another job. So it was
Ooh,
cancel each other out. I was getting a
yeah.
lot of those offers, lots of them from all over the country. And it just wasn't enough money to move. And so I got a job. I got two jobs. I volunteered at an AIDS food bank, and I volunteered at the community college teaching English as a second language, which was hilarious. It was
Really?
great.
Wow. Neat.
Loved it. Loved that job. It was so hilarious. The people were so cute. The immigrants who were trying to learn English, we had a blast.
Have
It
you
was
ever
great.
had you ever taught before, before doing that?
No,
Really?
no,
Wow.
it was great. And the second time
Wow, that's cool.
when I left KTU after 10 years, and the same kind of thing happened. I was getting lots of bites and lots of nibbles, but my wife was working here too, and again, it wasn't enough money to do the move. So it was another year I was out of work between KTU and CBS-FM, and there
Oh,
were
God.
even it was even a couple of offers from CBS Radio, and the local program director in San Francisco, the local program director in Sacramento were going to hire me for two different positions. And that's when Dan Mason said, no, 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 we want to talk to you about New York. Isn't that where you'd rather stay? I go, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, that same fear doesn't go away. But I have to say that my spiritual life really kept me going. And people I know in the industry kept calling just to see how I was. So if you're part of a great fraternity of broadcasters, you never get too worried, you never get too down on yourself. And as long as you're keeping fit physically, mentally, and spiritually, it's okay. It's really
Hmm.
okay. Being out of work isn't bad.
Hmm.
It's just being in the waiting room and how well you're going to use the time.
Yeah. When did you get into the spiritual thing? You're reminding me of Walt, Walt Baby Love, who is a bona fide preacher right now and does that. But he came upon that at a point in his. Actually, it's funny. He came upon it at a down point in his life where stuff just was starting to get out of sync, and he found God big time and got into it, and that's his life now.
Oh
So
yeah.
were yours all the way along, or at some point you sort of kicked in and like what there's
All
something
right.
here. I'm gonna go with that.
Let me put a potato in the gas tank. Um, when I was 15 years old, I joined the seminary to be a Catholic priest, and
Really? Whoa. Okay.
potato
There's one.
potato in the gas tank. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
No.
I lasted a couple of years, and most of my class got kicked out. Mine was basically for playing loud rock and roll. Brought my amp and my guitar, and oh, they couldn't. That's enough. After that, I
Wow.
was always close to God. God and I had a thing, but it was most of the time it was thanks for saving me. Catch you later. Yeah.
Wow, it's a remarkable feat for you to have been doing this for 50 years. Given everything you're saying, I'm guessing that you're not thinking that the headphones are going to get put down permanently anytime soon. Um, I wouldn't think. And maybe you don't even want to say if you're thinking about it or not. It doesn't seem like it though. It seems like you're still into it, like you were, kind of like almost like a kid in the beginning, which is remarkable, actually.
Funny thing about it, you just mentioned putting the headphones down. Yesterday, my wife and I were talking about going to one of the headphone manufacturers and getting a Broadway bill edition put out on the
Oh, good
market.
idea. Yeah.
I started laughing. I go, get out of here. But then the more she was explaining, I go, yeah, my signature across the headband. I can see that. Should we make them Bluetooth or corded? So we're going on. It's just fun. It really is just fun. And being able now to go in when I want to and stay home when I have to, that's pretty cool for a guy my
Yeah.
age. I'm 71 years old now. I'm still under contract till 2024. I haven't been told otherwise, and we have such a great relationship. And I'm pretty sure they're pretty pleased with the radio they're getting out of me, certainly the ratings.
Yeah,
You know,
And that's all that usually matters. If the ratings are good, and and you're not making such an exorbitant amount for whatever reason that all of a sudden it becomes a problem, and for the bottom line, you're golden.
That's right.
And they go like, yeah, sure, yeah, give him another 10. Hope he lives. That kind of thing.
I've seen radio personalities like that with the open door. They could work there as long as they wanted, but health usually became a concern. I mean, I could go down to Florida with you in the winter, and I could broadcast from there and do that. During the pandemic, a lot of us did.
That's what Gary Burbank did. Literally when Florida, because he's got a house down there in Donnell, and built a studio, probably much like you have in your basement or wherever you have it, garage or whatever. And he would be, on the air doing afternoons in Cincinnati I think he did that for like 5, 6, 7 years, in the entire winter he's down there, other than coming up for, like 2 or 3 days to do a couple events,
right.
Give that thing like you're here, but you're not, that kind of thing.
That's right.
Totally fine.
That's right. I just consider it very fortunate now to be able to be at that level, in that category, in that position in my career where everybody's okay with that, because I really do enjoy doing it. I don't enjoy the restrictions that it's a combination of age. Like, I've lost 5 miles an hour off my fastball, but by the same token, the world has gotten so woke and at the same time so politically correct that I dare not say whatever comes out of my mouth. I mean, you can't turn around, open the mic, and start rapping anymore. You can't do that. You just can't, no matter how quick your mind is. You know?
Yeah.
You got to edit everything.
Yeah, which is sad. And, sometimes some really gems really come out, gems being, oh man, that was really good. When you're not thinking about anything and you just let it rip. Although, sometimes some not so gems pop out too, but before you can get away with them. Yeah, it does happen. Yeah. Well, this has been fun. I really, it's great to finally, meet you, face to face, and and go through this. You've had a hell of a career. I mean, an amazing career, really.
Thank you very much. I've really always been interested in people starting out. I took our brand new promotion director from Michigan to Scott Shannon's movie premiere last night, introduced her around to everybody. She got to know everybody in the market. I love working with young talent, and I sponsor a lot of guys in AA. And I got to tell you something, if you're getting into radio, first become a great producer on the technical aspects, on how you produce audio. The first thing you got to do is learn how to run a tight audio or a very smooth audio. Second thing you got to do is learn how to read. Third thing you got to do is learn how to read while you're producing that audio. Fourth thing you got to learn how to do is ad lib what you're reading while you're producing that show. Fifth thing is, once in a while, go nuts and add a sentence here or there to what you're reading in your style while you're running a great smooth board. Takes about 5 to 10 years to do that. But it's one step after another.
Yeah, I 100%. It's funny. My last question for you would be, if your son wanted, seriously, like I literally got it written here, because I didn't want to miss it. If your son wanted to be a jock on the radio and he asked you to teach him how to be good, what are 4 or 5 things that you would concentrate on, honest to God, to get him to be, and you just rolled right into them. It was like, it was priceless. It was like, that was fantastic, Bill. Yeah.
That's totally great.
Good. And I'm not quite sure how to sign off this thing. But,
Well, Pat, all I can say is I really am honored, because you know how you enshrine guys that you've learned from, listened to, were inspired by on the radio. And you're one of those guys for me. So it's not even a labor. It's just, a very warm regard I have for you and being able to sit down and do this.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Bill.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you.